Hey, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot. With me is one of my recurring guests, Charles Daniels. I guess what used to be American Workers First now is putting American Workers First. And Charles is also very active in an official capacity with the labor union movement here in the United States. Charles, do you want to elaborate to the audience a little bit about your background, real briefly, how you got involved in unions, what your official capacity is, and a little bit about putting American Workers First, your nonprofit organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a union member for 22 years. I became a union member when I was 21 years old, and it's the reason why I have this house right here. It's why my son, who was just a baby when I joined, is now a college graduate. My other two kids are doing wonderful. I'm happily married. I got a car, things are paid off. I got a pension that I'm building towards. And it's all because I was fortunate enough to get that union job. And I feel very strongly that I have a debt to the labor movement, and I intend to pay that debt as best as I possibly can. So I'm the host with James Dennis on the Labor Vision podcast, which is the official podcast of the Michigan AFL-CIO, and we just talk about all things labor. And then I have just my pet project, just my baby, and it's called Putting Workers First. It used to be American Workers First, but the name didn't mean to some people what I wanted it to mean, and the negativity that was surrounding it, it became counterproductive with what I was trying to accomplish. So I changed it to Putting Workers First because I do believe that an injury to one is an injury to all. And ever since I've done that, I felt much better about talking about it because I don't feel like I have to defend it, because I don't think there's anything wrong. Like, I'm in Michigan, right? I'm rooting for Michigan to succeed over Florida. No offense to you, right? It's not that I hate Florida. It's just that I'm rooting for Michigan. And you know what? I'm rooting for the United States to succeed over, the Sudan, not because I hate the Sudan, but because I'm an American, right? And if aliens show up, I'll be pro-Earth over those aliens, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I understand that some people see that nationalism as a negative, and I think it can lead to those places. But anything can lead to those places if you go past the point of just common sense. So that's where the name change came from.
As you know, my politics, I'm what I term, it's my own coinage, a radical civic nationalist. It's not based on xenophobia or racial totalitarianism or racial national socialism or anything like that, or bigotry. What I feel nationalism, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds, I think actually nationalism, a civic nationalism, is the exact prescription this country needs in the short, mid, and long term to fuse our people together. What I would argue is one of the scourges of the United States, and this is where I depart from many of my other conservative guests, as well as half of probably my viewership, to be frank, is hyper-individualism that's often incentivized by major corporations. Is the real chief scourge here in the United States. It prevents us from getting good things done here in the United States. Even needed defense programs like EMP hardening of our grid and national civil defense, as well as also social programs that allow people to access the very bootstraps to pull themselves up. I mean, for example, not only I'm a member of my labor union down here in Florida as well, Government Supervisors Association, which is a division of the EOPIEU. I've been a member for many, many years. I'm also a branch manager in one of the local library systems down here in South Florida. And I have benefited from union contract negotiations, even here in Florida, which is, I think, one of the first right-to-work state that ever came to pass. But Florida's had its, if you look at this history, has also had its brushes with labor history, the great teachers strike about 50 plus years ago, and also other labor organizing drives too as well. It's not like it's non-existent here in this state. So I benefited from that. I benefited from a more generous student loan system and a state university system that I graduated from. Those straps, if you will, in the form of Pell Grants, the New York State Tuition Assistance Program, and other things, those were the straps that allowed me to pull myself up the boot, so to speak. And I think that's often lost in much of the political debates. I think we need to have a fundamental conversation because it's a battle between corporation incentivized hyper-individualism versus a healthy community spirit. Because obviously collectivism can be taken to the opposite extreme, which means a suppression of all freedom. What we need to have is what Arthur Schlesinger Jr. called for, is a sense of community without smothering or smothering the individual, and a sense of individualism that doesn't wall man off from community. That used to be viewed as moderate and centrist. Now that's viewed as commie, socialist, Bolshevik, fascist, statist, and everything. And before we talk about, our discussion, we go into our discussion about the hearings with Howard Schultz, the Starbucks CEO, as well as the panel discussions afterwards. Before we go into that, I have to say this. One of the things that really pushed me, I don't like using the term left, but one of the things that has pushed me in, whether you want to call it a populist direction, or I learned a new word, political syncretism, which is a combination of right-wing and left-wing themes, or what I term, radical civic nationalism, is when you have senators like, take Rand Paul, who I'm sure we'll bring up in this discussion. He likes to talk very much against socialism. And as a general rule, I agree with that, as I understand socialism, because everybody has different opinions of what it is. But yet, as I sent you in an email, and you probably were aware of this as I DM'd you, Rand Paul was saying, oh, we got to trade with China, we got to trade with Russia. He voted for permanent normal trade relations in 2012 for Vladimir Putin. That's an Obama, Hillary Clinton initiative. He's for trade with Cuba, with Vietnam, and he said, look, I know they're horrible human rights abusers, but we're just going to shower them with iPhones and American cars and all the rest of it, and when they see the wonders of capitalism, everything's going to be fine. And I will say, with most free market people that I've come across personally, and libertarians and your economic Reaganomics types, there's a couple of things that work. Either, frankly, they're just greedy individuals that love money, that have an ounce of sociopathic ideology, that they just care about themselves and burying the others. Secondly, they receive money by promoting this, and they've made a career, and they don't want to upset the gravy boat. And then the third part with many of them is, if you talk to them, they are full-on ideologues. It is their religion. They accept it as gospel. No matter what evidence you throw at them, they're always going to deflect. They're always going to change the goalposts. That's why, that's Mr. Davenport, I'm talking to you, Mr. Davenport, who some of our earlier shows, you recently made comments, challenged me for a debate. That's why I don't debate and discuss things with libertarians, even though there are some issues I agree with them on. For the most part, other than debating Marxist-Leninists and National Socialists, libertarians and your free market extreme free market types, it's pointless to have a discussion. You're not going to convince them. The only way they're going to learn is a come to Jesus moment, like the gentleman who was a libertarian who wrote for Slate magazine after a visit to Honduras when it was controlled by a neoliberal globalist free market government, where he realized that his idealistic libertarian utopia was a disaster. And that was written some years ago. I encourage people to read it. When you have those come to Jesus moments, that's the best way people learn. You have to learn on your own. You're not going to convince these people because they're ideologues. And I think that's a big part of it. So we saw the ugliness of free market, social Darwinism, and libertarianism at that hearing, didn't we? With the Starbucks CEO. What are your impressions of Mr. Schultz, the senators? I'm going to give the mic to you, and you could go on for 10 minutes for all I care. Don't be brief.
Well, overall, just to be real about it, I was disappointed. I didn't think that, and I'm using this term, our side did a great job of presenting what was happening there. And I also don't think they had a great order in how they presented their information. And I don't think they did a good enough job hammering down on the facts. Because to me, the entire hearing was about, had Starbucks engaged in illegal union busting activity? I don't care about, I earned this money, all that stuff's fine, right? Or capitalism or socialism or any of that stuff. It all came down to, was Starbucks breaking the law? Are we a nation of laws or are we not? And I felt like he was able to wiggle around that over and over again. Um, it seemed like his stance was, I'm going to deny that Starbucks broke the law, and that means that we didn't break the law. I don't care what the worker said. I don't care what the NLRB said. I don't care about rulings. I don't care about things that we're being forced to do. I'm just going to say that we didn't break the law, and good enough. And I did think later in the hearing, when you got someone like Senator Murphy up there who did the analogy with the speeding tickets, if someone gets pulled over 100 times for speeding and then they say, hey, I never speed, it doesn't seem to make much sense. So I thought that was it. And then I also thought that Senator Markey out of Massachusetts did a good job where he went back to Schultz's story, because Schultz's story is all about how I'm the American dream, right? This horrible thing happened to me when I was coming up. My father, got injured and he lost his job because of it. And all these bad things happened to my family. And now I've created a company where that's not going to happen to people. I'm going to take care of them. They're not going to deal with a bad employer like that. Where he didn't understand that the origin story for the hero and the origin story for the villain are exactly the same, right? They have something bad that happens to them at some point, and one decides, I was hurt, so everyone's going to hurt. And one decides, I was hurt, and because of that, I'm going to make sure no one gets hurt. And Schultz decided that I get to be the arbiter of right and wrong and good and bad and what happens to these people, and they don't get a say, and I don't care what the law says, and so be it. I know what's best for them. Instead of saying, if they want to organize and form a union, that's their constitutional right, so be it. We'll make the union, and if they're individual stores and they start to fail and the union isn't bad, all they need to decertify is get a 50% vote. That's it. So if you got 6 people there, which you referenced, and all of a sudden things are awful in the store and 4 out of the 6 decide that they don't want to be part of a union anymore, they decertify and away they go. But instead, they'd rather spend millions and millions of dollars fighting it and depriving these people of their constitutional right to form a union. And I thought our folks did a horrible job of holding his feet to the fire on that and sticking with, you don't get to just decide that you didn't break the law. That's not your decision. And the fact that he immediately after his testimony got up and left before all those partners, because if you use flowery language and you call your employees partners, apparently you can deprive them of their fundamental rights.
Of course.
When those partners got up and they said, these are the things that are wrong, he didn't want to hear that. He didn't want to listen because he has no interest in those people being successful. What interests him is maintaining power and being a multi-billionaire. And that's what I saw.
Yeah, and I think it's, oh, I guess I have an echo here. I hear my voice. Okay, so hopefully that'll go away because that always throws me off. But yeah, no, that's a very interesting presentation. I think you make a great point that they didn't pin him when he kept on saying, well, Starbucks didn't break the law. He said that multiple times, and you might not be, quote, breaking the law, but you're skirting the law and weaving around the law and advised by your legal team how to avoid actually negotiating in good faith. Usually when you have people like that, it's like when they plead the Fifth Amendment before Congress, you're hiding something. It's like, and I'll take the right-wing view here, it's like when various communists were called to testify in the 1940s and 1950s, and they're saying, well, I take the Fifth Amendment. No, they're hiding something. They're concealing something. What I said on the Labor Vision podcast and our after conversation afterwards is that unpopular political and economic forces, in order to gain advantages, A, they're going to portray themselves as victims, B, they're going to try and conceal their actual true agenda, their true activities. What I found intriguing, which one of the many things I found intriguing was holding these meetings on Zoom rather than in person. What is your take on that? Because talking about arguably potentially hiding something, what about that whole deal. As a 21-year veteran of union work and union organizing, what's that about? Can you give your opinion on that?
He's doing union busting. He's trying to make it as difficult as possible for these folks to negotiate. These workers aren't lawyers. They can't compete with some $600 an hour lawyer. So they have labor organizers that are helping them. They got their folks, right? And trying to have in-person meetings where you have to fly people in and you have to drive your workers in, and they're doing it on their own time, and there's travel associated with it. And I've heard that Starbucks will set up these meetings and then cancel them at the last second. It makes it so difficult for those workers to actually negotiate and bargain in good faith. So if it's over Zoom and this whole argument, we don't know who's in the room, you don't know if I have a tape recorder in my pocket that's recording what you're saying when we're sitting face to face. You don't know if I have my phone on that's on speaker somewhere else that's sending that information out. You don't really care about that. And also, why are you so concerned with what you're saying to me face to face? Are we not just telling the truth? Because like Nevin, dude, like I'll have this conversation anywhere, right? The purpose of this is we're trying to discuss something. So negotiations, you're trying to come to a solution that benefits everyone. And I don't know why you would want to hide what you're doing there. Send over bargain contracts before. You have proposals, and the company has proposals, and you give them yours, and they give you yours. And sometimes there's some play back and forth, and you don't tell them everything, and you shoot for here, and they come for here, and it's over here. But you end up meeting somewhere in the middle, and hopefully you have a contract that both sides is a little bit unhappy with, and usually that's a good contract. Starbucks hasn't done that because they don't want to do that. They're trying to bleed this union out by making it as difficult as possible, and that's illegal. It's union busting.
Correct. And other companies have done that over the decades, particularly since the advent of the 1980s and beyond. And that's why he's saying it's legal. Technically, he has his lawyers that can drag this out. That's a common corporate tactic to drag out these negotiations. And okay, so they're fined. And the audience may or may not know this, the fines and the legal costs that have to be paid to companies is considered a tax write-off. What is that about? In fact, corporate executives refer to it as, quote, their license to hunt, or their hunting license. And what I found interesting also is, and some of the senators brought it up towards the last part of the discussion with CEO Howard Schultz, was the power differential. The way Schultz and some of the Republican senators talked about have a direct relationship with the company versus being represented by a union. See, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, the right-wingers there, it's not just the left that uses Aesopian language to cover up their true agenda. You have to understand, it's these China-loving, Russia-loving companies that done trade with them, that bust unions. They use the same Aesopian language. When you're trying to maintain power and privilege that's even not always justified, you're going to do whatever it takes. And that's what unpopular political and economic ideologies and interest groups will do. I'm saying that to the audience, because what I'm trying to do is kind of break open-minded people on the right from neoliberalism, as I have been broken from neoliberal market fundamentalism, because it really didn't carry out what I felt were conservative values of national security, more entrepreneurship, stronger families, stronger local communities, etc. And as Charles, you've said about me, which is true, I'm kind of a facts and numbers guy. Yes, I have my ideology. I make no apologies about it. But I think it's an ideology that many people across the political spectrum, left or right or center or apolitical, embrace here in the United States. Now, one of the things that was mentioned towards the end, which I was glad by about 2 or 3 Democratic senators, including the senator from Minnesota, I believe her name is Senator Smith, who is a businesswoman herself, and 1 or 2 others, was the power differential. A direct relationship with your manager is, number one, not the same as having somebody who's a seasoned negotiator representing you, because you might be a barista And you might not have negotiating skills or quick on your feet to negotiate with a manager who is more powerful. I mean, it's not like no matter what kind of lipstick you paint the pig, it's still a pig. Partner, employee, or Walmart, they refer to them, I think, as associates and things of that nature. It's all the same. There is no equal power between your supervisor and particularly an executive or Howard Schultz went down the breakdown of the management, the regional manager, the district manager. Of course, you have the store managers. They are more powerful than you, and probably, for better or for worse, they're also more quick on their feet in disarming a worker. A worker might come up and say, I have a kid, I've been working 20 years for the company, could you give me a bigger raise or whatever? That individual is not going to have the same power differential vis-a-vis their district or regional manager or Howard Schultz or the store managers. And I think Howard Schultz was being dishonest in not realizing that, because I'm not a business person. I mean, I have a lot of business people in all sides of my family, and sometimes I've worked in them. The bosses, no matter how good they are, and there are plenty of good bosses, they still hold more power. And that is confirmed by our political system in the guise of free speech, like Citizens United, Buckley versus Vallejo. The decrease in the percentage of private sector union representation used to be 35%. Now it's a little above 10% nationally. That's a power differential. But with a union, you have seasoned negotiators that are quick on their feet, that have their union members' best interests at heart. And whenever I hear that they choose to have a direct relationship with their employer, they make it sound like, oh, it's this small mom and pop business, and you can go and have an open door policy and fly up to the regional manager's office and talk to them like they're your best friend, like we're one big happy family. And that's not always the case. In many cases, that's not. And that's why you need an organization, a national organization, to represent the working classes vis-a-vis the employees. And I know the libertarians who are subscribers or listeners, they're going to have a hissy fit. And that's okay. Because if you haven't had a hissy fit and a heart attack, Mr. Libertarian, Mr. Free Marketeer, then you haven't been listening to my show. So, Charles, can you address this power dynamic and your view, your observations about direct relationship with the company?
Yeah, it's complete and total garbage. To your point, this isn't some small store where they got one person and you got the guy, or it's not like Howard Schultz is sitting in the office and you can go talk to him. This is a multi-billion-dollar franchise model business that is turnkey, that has protocols and procedures for every single little thing that they do, coming down to count each bean, probably, right? But they pretend like trying to put something like that in place to deal with the employees is some giant hardship. At the core, all a union really is a contract between the workers and the company that's agreed upon. You're going to do this and give us this, and we're going to do this, and the response is going to be this. That's it. What they want is a relationship that they can change at the drop of the hat based on what's good for them, without any care for what is good for those workers. So if I'm in a non-union shop, if I'm an at-will employee, they can fire me for anything, Nevin. Like if it turns out my manager's a racist, a sexist, an anti-Semite, if he's a hardcore Christian and I happen to be an atheist, if he's an atheist and I'm a hardcore Christian, he can all those isms come into play and he can fire me for anything. Where if I'm a union member, I'm protected by just cause. They have to have an investigation. The discipline has to be reasonable. It has to be objective. There has to be notice. I have to know that it was wrong for me to do it. It has to be appropriate. The punishment has to fit the crime. There has to be proof. They have to prove it, and it has to be evenly administered. That's what union members have, which basically means they have to have a correct reason for disciplining someone. So they don't like that because they don't want to have to prove that they're being moral and just. They want to do exactly what Howard Schultz did at that hearing, saying, I know what's right for y'all. How dare you question me? Because that's what he was showing up there, Nevin. He hated that they were questioning him. Oh, there's one thing billionaires hate more than anything else. It's common folks asking them questions. How dare they, right? Which goes back to the meeting that he had where that lady was talking there, and he told her, if you don't like it, quit and go somewhere else. Because that's his response. If you don't like how I'm treating you, go somewhere else. That's all that I care about. And I think that's why they should have had Senator Markey go first, because he called him out and he riled him up. Because Howard Schultz was up there lying. He was lying his ass off. He knows exactly what they're doing. He knows all about the union busting. He's been super careful about the whole thing, but he knows. And when Markey got up there and he started talking about his dad, and he said, you're not your dad in this scenario. You're the company that fired your dad. You turned into the bad guy on this. And Schultz was flipping out. You don't know what you're saying. You're wrong. All those things. That's why they should have had him go first. Get him to actually answer hard questions. And then maybe you'll get something a little more honest. And that's why, even though I didn't love how the hearing went, I thought it could have been better. I think it's really important that we get these billionaires up in front of the people where they have to be held accountable and answer questions to the American people, because they don't want to do that. And it makes them lie. And nothing makes a person who is a narcissist angrier than having to lie about something to common people. How dare you make me stoop to this level right here? And it just infuriates them. And you know what? If those other billionaires out there that are seeing it, maybe it'll make them think twice before they exploit their workers. So even though I don't know what the response will be from this, I'm happy that it happened.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they definitely need to be held accountable and exposed as much as possible. I wanted to read something because I always, as a historian, I mean, a history major. I majored in history and political science, double major at the State University of New York and Albany. And I always like to figure out and ask why and what motivates. That's always the fascinating thing. What motivates somebody to become a Hitler-loving National Socialist? What motivates someone to become a communist? What motivates many within the billionaire class? And there was a very revealing New York Times article, if I could find it, with its hedge fund trader. His name, he was a wealthy hedge fund trader, Sam Polk. And he wrote a tell-all article in the New York Times. And the article is For the Love of Money, New York Times, January 18th, 2014. Oh, you're grabbing your coffee. I thought you were grabbing your note pen. I'm kidding. I'm messing around.
I can't, if you want me to.
Yeah, I'm messing around, bro. And he wrote that he was working elbow to elbow with billionaires. I was a giant fireball of greed. I think about how my colleagues could buy Micronesia if they wanted to, or become mayor of New York City. They didn't just have money, they had power. Power beyond getting a table at Les Bernardines. Senators came to their offices, they were royalty. And then he also said, quote, in the end, it was actually my absurdly wealthy bosses who helped me see the limitations of unlimited wealth. I was in a meeting with one of them and a few other traders, and they were talking about the new hedge fund regulations. Most everyone on Wall Street thought they were a bad idea. But isn't it better for the system as a whole, as I asked? The room went quiet, and my boss shot me a withering look. I remember his saying, I don't have the brain capacity to think about the system as a whole. All I'm concerned about is how this affects our company. And which means how much money they can garner. And that was there's so many other articles and tell-all articles out there. And the Sims who constantly kiss the asses of the billionaire classes, when you confront them with this evidence, it's just they don't want to hear it. And this is what motivates them. They have power. Just like we don't like a big, overarching, authoritarian, collectivist government with no accountability. What the United States has become over the decades, and Howard Schultz is symptomatic of this, is we have become what I term an oligarchy with democratic trappings, or properly termed a plutocracy, which is, as you know, a rule by wealthy men and women. That's what we've become. And I'm really not surprised, but appalled by, other than Senator Braun from Illinois, who I think made some really good points from my point of view about unions. If you treat your workers well, you don't need a union. Duh. I mean, you remember him saying that. And if I was in the Senate, I'd be happy to probably on certain issues work with Senator Braun, because his opinion approximates my opinion of union management relations. And I think, yes, Senator Markey did a bang up job. I think some of the other Democratic senators did a decent job in discussing the power differential. I think it was Senator Tammy Baldwin and Senator Smith of Minnesota. I give them a lot of credit for that. But the only Republican in the hearing that really, I felt like that represented my own kind of now extinct form of republicanism, and I say this as a registered Republican. I mean, I go back and forth to vote in the primaries, but he represents the type of republicanism that has been dead for a while. What did you think? And I know this is tempting, it's like a lion after meat here. What was your reaction to Senator Braun of Illinois? My compliments to him, as well as the other Republicans that were far more anti-union. I mean, some of them, like the ranking member Cassidy, at least said, "Look, I support the right to organize." He also mentioned not only. Let's start first with going over their views of Howard Schultz, the treatment, the charges. I know Senator Cassidy mentioned, well, the NRLB in those districts are being investigated for misconduct. So why don't we unwrap the Republican response? We can start with Rand Paul. We can start with Senator, Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma, and the others, as well as Senator Braun from Illinois, who really, frankly, was one of the, probably, if I had to identify with any of the senators, I would be definitely closer to him. Yes, the Democrats to a degree too, but definitely Senator Braun. So take it away, Charles.
I think it's union busting. I think it's union busting 101. This is something that folks do when they want to depower unions. And when you talk about unions, for me, I'm just talking about workers, right? Because unions are just made up of workers. So when you want to take power away from workers, you say there's mass corruption because this, and this, because these four locals somewhere had an issue, all unions are corrupt. And because of that, you can't trust them, right? They don't care about the fact that you can show 1,000 more examples of businesses being corrupt. You can talk about politicians being corrupt. You can talk about religious leaders being corrupt. You can talk anytime that there's people and money, there will be corruption. It's just they just go together. It's peanut butter and jelly, man. You're not going to it's not going to ever change. But it's still something that gives you the ability to actually hold people accountable and also take more insight from people. Like you can actually measure those kind of things. There's a chance. So I think it's disingenuous for them to say that all these labor unions are bad, and we support unions and your constitutional right to union. Everyone should be able to do that, but they support legislation that's designed to break unions. They're all from right to work states that they know the only purpose of that is to destroy unions. And they support that. And on the other side of their mouth, they say they're pro-worker and blah, blah, blah. But they're just not. They're pro-corporations. They're pro-billionaires. They believe in supply-side economics. The money's just eventually going to trickle down to everyone. Don't worry. It's going to happen. We know it's been 50 years now, but don't worry, man. Any day now, it's going to trickle down. And to your point earlier, when you were talking to folks that might have different political, ideologies than you and I do, one of the things that I would say to them is when you look at a company like Starbucks or Walmart, or all the giant corporations that are out there, where in this testimony, in this hearing, they were talking about worker hours and that they were having them below certain thresholds because then they would lose their benefits. Well, Nevin, what happens when those workers don't have benefits through the company? They have to get them through the state. Who pays for those? We do. These corporations are being subsidized by we the people that they're exploiting by paying poverty wages and not giving them enough time to accrue the health care that's the carrot that they're dangling over their heads. Which one of the things that they've been doing lately is when workers go on strike, they take their health care away. Because holy smokes, what am I going to do when I've lost my health care and I've got a kid with cerebral palsy that I have to take care of? So I think we need to end corporate welfare. And then I also think it's important that you mentioned libertarians earlier, and it's easy to believe certain things. But I'll tell you, if all of a sudden your kid gets cancer and gets sick and you have a good job with good healthcare and you still get bankrupted because of it for something that you had no control over whatsoever, you might feel a little bit differently about everyone just take care of themselves. It's all going to be fine. Because you talked about bootstraps. And here's the reality. Not everyone can reach their bootstraps. And people that think otherwise, to me, are selfish assholes.
Well, I mean, you're right. And, I used to, I don't know if you're aware of this, Charles, but I used to have very strong free market, libertarian oriented belief systems. I was very concerned about anti-capitalism and criticism of capitalism because what I felt was, and still feel in some ways, depending on the type of anti-capitalism expressed, what it ends up in, which is Marxism, Leninism, National Socialism, Fascism, Islamic fundamentalism, etc., which are all fundamentally anti-capitalist ideologies. So I felt that any criticism of that could lead to the building of these movements, these populist and nationalist, bad nationalist movements that can wipe away our freedoms. And frankly, I still have concerns about that, frankly. But what's different is that the big corporations, not all of them, many of them, and their political protectors are actually the ones pouring the gasoline on the fire of a growing anti-capitalist movement in the United States that's not entirely organized, but it's clearly latent, as the polls show. And I've tried to privately explain this to some guests on this program, who I respect in many ways, but when I try to explain this, it's very difficult to impossible. And I'm going to be honest with you and the audience, it's very discouraging to me. And it's very deeply upsetting, because when you're a strong proponent of anti-communism, I hate to get in the weeds, but I'm trying to do this deliberately to try and reach my conservative and right-wing element of my listener base, because I have a feeling I have all kinds of listeners from the political spectrum. I'm begging them to see this just for the facts the way they are. And unions is a very good way to rechannel through reform measures to channel this anti-capitalist sentiment away, kill it, by making people capable of achieving a quote-unquote middle class or bourgeois lifestyle. I mean, that's why historically, when you really scratch below the surface, most anti-capitalist revolutionary movements hate unions. I mean, we had Caleb Maupin's Center for Political Innovation doing a demonstration against the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation Museum. They are hardline, tanky Marxist-Leninists. He's a very bright young man, too, I might add. But he said, one of his militants and activists were saying, the unions are bought, they're not getting, they're basically siphoning off, money that they don't deserve and stuff like that. These are some of the communist groups. And I was listening to that, and I said to myself, in some ways, this is no different than you're sort of Reaganite, supply side economics, distrust of unions. What did he say? I'll try and find it here. Yeah, he said, this is in a March speech, our unions are bought out. Our unions don't represent the people. Well, that's what the Republicans in the Senate said, many of them. The unions that give the people wealth to be reactionaries, which means that allows them to become bourgeois. Okay? Do you get that through your heads, anti-communists here? That give people the wealth to sit on and say, oh, I deserve more. I deserve more than the average worker. Well, the most reactionary pro-corporate elements of the Carter administration and the Reagan administrations and afterwards said the same thing. He says further, these unions are destroying because we no longer have the excess surplus wealth to give them. What? We can no longer buy them off. The solutions they offer is more failing wars. Their solutions is the implosion and destruction. And I could read other Communist Party quotes, and it's many times it's the same thing when you really scratch below the surface. That's what they really think of unions. And they're not your friends, and they shouldn't be in unions. But the Republicans, other than Senator Braun from Illinois, are so reactionary that some of the arguments of Caleb Maupin's group, for example, who recently held these demonstrations in Washington, D.C., well, we have no more surplus wealth. Oh, you want more and you're more deserving than the other workers? Divide and conquer. You see, brother, where the reactionary so-called corporate right labor haters merge with far left totalitarians. And one of my friends who works for a library system in North Carolina, or worked, and he was fired, and he's an amalgam of right and left-wing beliefs, and he did something kind of minor in the scheme of things, and his bosses, his supervisors at his library branch were culturally on the left, hated the Second Amendment, everything else. And they were ultra woke, let's put it that way. And because, you know, he had his Second Amendment interest and other things, and he was accused of misconduct. And I worked with him in the Broward County Library System for a long time, and we became friends. And he was a good staff member. He was interested in live history, historical reenacting. They fired him. And in that library system in North Carolina, there was no union. So the woke left used the power granted to them by the Tea Party, Reagan, reactionary Bourbon Democrat governments that have existed in North Carolina. You had the woke left using the powers granted them by the reactionary right to crush an employee with certain strong conservative sympathies. And when I see things like that, brother, this is what turns me against people like Senator Mark Wayne Mullen and Rand Paul. And Rand Paul, I got to tell you, there are some things I like about him. I kid you not. Like, for example, he blasted Chris Christie in the 2015 Republican debate about when Chris Christie said, if I'm president, I'm going to shoot Russian warplanes down over Syria once I declare it a no-fly zone. I'm not a warmonger. I'm for a strong national defense, but I also don't believe in poking the bear and dragon unnecessarily. So, and I'm not a hyper-interventionist neocon. But Rand Paul's antics were disgusting. This is the same man who clashed with Senator Josh Hawley, and Josh Hawley was in the right about this, about banning TikTok use on electronic devices provided by the federal government to its employees because of concerns of data collection by ultimately the Chinese Communist Party. And Rand Paul is there defending TikTok, wrapping himself up in, excuse the language, this bullshit mantra of First Amendment. You have Rand Paul in 2014 saying, yeah, Vietnam, China, Russia, and Cuba are serial human rights violators. Yeah, and we're gonna basically trade with them and continue to trade with them and shower them with Apple iPads and American cars. And they're going to love democracy. Well, we've been doing that with every dictatorship for decades. It has not worked out. And I submit that many of these people know it. They're either blinded by ideology or greed, or they're just basically they view these corporations as gods. And Rand Paul is funded, at least in the past, by the Koch brothers. I mean, if Rand Paul said, okay, we should not trade with Cuba, China, or Vietnam, Koch brothers are going to pull their money, because they're very much activist political donors. So let's beat up on Rand Paul and Markway Mullen. Markway Mullen is another one. He's another beauty. What did you think of their conduct? And you can curse, you can spout fire on this show, Charles, because I just did, and I do that on my live streams because I get so lit by this shit. Take it away, Charles.
Man. Let's do it, man. Rand Paul, the thing that infuriated me is he decided that instead of trying to improve a situation, the best thing that you could do is redefine the meaning of something. He was up there talking about how great everything is now, that poverty, it's not what it was before, that your money goes farther. And this is a senator from a state that has the 5th highest poverty level out of all the states. So tell me, when you go and you talk to those poor people that are living in squalor, that can't afford anything, that don't know where their next meal is going to come from, do they feel fortunate to be in the situation that they're in? So for Rand Paul to sit up there and to pull the let them eat cake kind of thing while he's a multi-millionaire, dining on lobster and caviar, like, fuck that guy, man. I think it's absolutely disgusting. And one of the things that frustrates me as a union advocate is, like, I'm a numbers guy, just like you said. I'm pragmatic about stuff. If this legislation that they supported, if I could look at it and see how it improves the lives of the people in their communities, I'd be hard pressed to argue. But it doesn't. It suppresses them, and they always turn it to the angle of, well, this is bad for business, right? It's bad for business. It's bad for business. Well, I think if businesses are exploiting and crushing people, well, that's bad for people. And we're a government instituted of the people, by the people, for the people. Government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. That's Jefferson. That's their hero that said that. So if we're not consenting to being exploited, well, there's my problem. And to go back to what you were talking about previously, you'll be hard pressed to find a more pro-union person than me, but I still will acknowledge readily that unions are not perfect, not even close. There's all kinds of trouble with unions, but I think they work every day to be more perfect. They're a democracy. They have constitutions. They have due process through the grievance procedure. These are things that are all very familiar to me as an American. And one of the things that frustrates me so much, Nevin, is that people have decided that the way things are now are how they always were. And they weren't. CEOs didn't always make 400x what the median worker made. It wasn't too long ago that they made 20x. And they did just fine. And there were still rich people, and they were still able to live this opulent lifestyle that normal people never even get to touch. And man, you and me, we're doing well for ourselves, right? But we're nowhere near their level. I think folks in the United States that earn over $1 million a year, you're talking about the 0.1%, not the 1%, the 0.1%. It's such a small thing. And if you look back at history, when you have this gap, like the stretch between the haves and the have-nots, we know where it ends up. It ends up in great suffering. Income inequality levels are really bad right now. So I would say to folks, man, why are you sticking up for corporations that are exploiting your labor and making your life work? I understand why people are frustrated with Democrats. I cannot for the life of me figure out why they think Republicans are their friends.
Right. And yeah, especially most of the Republicans nowadays, particularly other than Senator Braun, who I applaud. And it's just those others do not care about the working class. I mean, when you had Senator Cassidy bringing up the oil companies and the Keystone Pipeline, number one, the Keystone Pipeline was not going to be consumed by Americans. It was supposed to be, it was going to be, yes, refined in Louisiana, and it's a dirty grade oil, and then it was going to be shipped out of the country, number one, from what I understand. That's,
I think to China.
Exactly.
Yes, it was a Canadian company that was sending their oil to China.
Exactly. And you mentioned income inequality. You're a numbers guy. I know you are, Charles. And I think I mentioned that before. And you are. And here's the thing. Rand Paul, if things are so wonderful for, Americans can get, $5 coffee and everybody's in there and it's not all rich people. Okay, let's break it down, brother. 63% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. You have 60% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency for years. 40 some odd percent can't cover even a $400 emergency. Now the Rand Corporation, Charles, maybe I'm a little slow and dumb, particularly in the morning, because maybe I need some more coffee. The Rand Corporation, is that a left-wing Bolshevik outfit? I just want your confirmation.
I'm honestly, brother, I'm not too familiar with it. When I try to delve into those things, I get terribly frustrated.
And the U.S. federal government, Rand Corporation, very well-known consultant. That's okay.
Well, I mean, who else consumes more than the military-industrial complex, right? Keep people afraid, keep them terrified. Yeah.
They had a study which revealed that the true cost of income inequality for average Americans is $2.5 trillion per year during the period from 1975 to 2018. So, if our capitalist system, in my opinion, was properly balanced and regulated, the Rand Corporation found that the annual pay for Americans would be $48,000 and $63,000 higher per year. I want everybody to think of that. The Rand Corporation is not a Bolshevik, communist, fascist, revolutionary outfit, mind you. This is sobering. That is really bad. That is theft. Rand Paul and the so-called right-wing Republicans, the Tea Party, the ones that say taxation is theft, well, this gives a whole new meaning to the word theft. Workers are literally, and professionals and small business people are having their money stolen from them. Contrary to so-called economic theory, of economists like John, I think his name was John Bates, who said, well, workers are paid by the capitalists what they're worth, and that's how wages are set. Bullshit. That is bullshit. Workers are not necessarily paid what they're worth. And this study proves this as far as I'm concerned. And as for unions, I'm glad that you criticize unions. So do I on this program. There are elements of unions and union leaders I'm very strongly critical of. Like Andy Stern when he was praising the People's Republic of China's political and economic system, which earned him the ire, according to an article years ago in The Nation, of other union leaders, including the head of Mr. Fiedler of the operating engineers, as well as others. I was pissed, and I even did a show when Kent Wong was on Bernie Sanders' Roundtable on Labor. Kent Wong is part of the communist element of union leadership. That is wrong. And to this day, and especially back when I was a kid and before I was born, you had union leaders that always took a stronger stand, much stronger than big business, I might add, against communist dictatorships and doing business with them. George Meany is one of my heroes, to be perfectly frank with you and the audience. I've talked about it with the audience before. So, yeah, I'm critical of unions, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because you have bad, corrupt billionaires, doesn't mean that I want to get rid of billionaires necessarily. If billionaires are paying their workers reasonably well, as long as they perform well, a living wage with decent benefits, then what the hell do I care? I'm not going to want to throw out the capitalist system. Why? Because people have natural yearnings to own private property, to develop businesses, to better their communities through new innovations and new products. And because in many economic sectors, free enterprise, free market competition works. But we also have to look on the other end, with all the facts that I brought up, when you have a total laissez-faire variant of corporate capitalism, of globalized corporate capitalism that does not care about communities. We read Sam Polk's tell-all article, of which he used to believe in that, and then his eyes were opened. It got to be too much. There's the evidence, the how, the why, the background. When all these Republicans talk about, oh, freedom and, oh my God, taxation is theft, I want to throw up. It feels like I feel like doing an hour-long monologue with these people on, here are the facts. But they're not going to care. They don't care. They're ideologues, or they're paid and corrupt by forces that want to smash unions. And that's the sad thing. But I agree with you. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because an institution has rot doesn't mean you throw out the institution, because you don't know that if your other alternatives, a radical change, is going to be far worse. So, do you have any concluding remarks and stuff? Because I know we're lurching towards the hour mark. And you and I can go on and on. That's why I let you speak and say your piece without interruption, because you've given me always the same courtesy. So definitely give your other thoughts on parts of the hearings that I didn't cover, that we didn't cover. Take it away for like 5 or 10 minutes. I don't care. I'll sit back and sip my coffee and happily listen.
So thank you, Nevin, and I always enjoy speaking to you. And one of the truths that I believe is that only equals speak the truth. So when we're talking on these things, I think it's good because we consider each other equals. And that's why I would say that when Howard Schultz gets up there and he lies in front of that Senate hearing, it's because he does not consider himself to be the equal of those people. He thinks that he is above them. And I am not anti-capitalist. I'm anti-exploitation. And I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, libertarian, the most woke person in the world. I don't think you should be being exploited for your labor. That's just where I've decided that I'm going to draw the line as far as morality in this world when it comes to politics. I try to stay away from other stuff because I think they're much more objective. When it comes to worker information, I can usually do a pretty good job of going by the numbers. This is why I believe it. And I think that in this country where wage theft makes up something like $50 billion a year, and there's no consequences whatsoever for it, but if one of Rand Paul's constituents in Kentucky that's starving and in poverty goes to the 7-Eleven, which is the only store around that sells food, and steals something to feed his family, oh, they're going to come down hard on him. There's all kinds of consequences for him. So I don't think that because things are this way now, that we should just accept them moving forward. I think we should be demanding better, and I think he should be paid a fair day wages for a fair day page. I think that's a common sense kind of thing. And I'll leave it with this, Nevin. These folks out there that think, and I see them all the time, man, on my social media, they're always defending Schultz and Elon Musk and all these other billionaires. They worship in like they're golden calves, man. It's so freaking weird. But you might think that you're on their team, but they know that they're not on your team.
It's so true. And I say this, and I couldn't have said it better. And I'm precisely trying to reach even a few of those people who are on your social media, as you just said, that try to defend Schultz and attack unions. There was an article there was an article, it was originally in National Review magazine, and it was reprinted in Gary Will's Nixon Agnosties, a book published in 1970. And he was a conservative sociologist, Will Herberg, and he wrote, quote, "The way Western bourgeois society developed to cope with massive proletarian alienation was that most bourgeois of bourgeois institutions, the labor union, we still have not learned to appreciate properly the conservative, anti-disintegrative service that the labor unions, despite all their faults and shortcomings, have rendered to the social order." One more quote, because I'm trying to reach these people. Maybe it's a lost cause, brother, but I'm a stubborn son of a gun. An ex-communist who later became a very well-known conservative, Willie Schlamm, he even was a John Bircher. And he wrote Whittaker Chambers, who was also an ex-communist and a former spy for the Soviet Union, who defected and revealed, was one of the many American communist defectors that revealed the Soviet intelligence operations in the United States. And he became a traditional conservative. And Whittaker Chambers wrote, "History tells us that the rock core of the conservative position, or any fragment of it, can be held realistically only if conservatism will accommodate itself to the needs and hopes of the masses. Only if conservatism will accommodate itself to the needs and hopes of the masses. Needs and hopes, which, like the masses themselves, are the product of machines. A conservatism that cannot face the facts of the machines and mass production and its consequences in government and politics is foredoomed to futility and petulance." And unfortunately, that is what conservatism has become, particularly since the advent of Reaganism. And a key tenet of Reaganism is union busting. A key tenet of corporate-led globalism is union busting. They are one and the same in many ways. So I say to the people who claim they're patriots, that they're conservative nationalists, you got to think about the people you're defending. They are not your friends. These are woke corporations that are using the institutions of right to work and loopholes and labor laws to, like my friend in North Carolina, to persecute and ultimately fire in non-union environments more conservative-leaning colleagues. These are your people that might go to the shooting range with. These are people that you might meet with your other families at church. Because it could work both ways. Right to work and anti-union practices can be used as forms of political persecution. And this is not the first time this has happened. This is why you need a union to protect you. This is why you need a contract to protect you. This is why you need somebody that you pay limited dues to. You know, I hear libertarians like the libertarian and the free market Reaganites. They'll say, "Oh, you could just go to court and settle it and get a lawyer." Excuse me, paying union dues comparatively is a lot cheaper than paying a lawyer, even for the consulting fee. You know, put that in your pipe, Mr. Libertarian and Mr. Free Marketeer. Don't lie to us. Don't you be lying to us. Okay? So the fact of the matter is this is why unions are necessary. And there were conservatives back then, as we just read, that were farsighted enough to admit it because they saw how unions de-radicalized the masses. It tied Americans into being loyal to our political and economic and social order. And now what do we have? We have embarrassments like Mark Wayne Mullen. We have embarrassments like Rand Paul, this is in the case of economics, and others, that, well, frankly, are caricatures of how the left paints the Republican Party and conservatism and big business and capitalism. You know, you're bitching, guys, why Democratic Socialists of America is growing, why more and more Americans in polls for years are saying that socialism is communist goods. And I say this to the average conservative voter that opposes me, take a hard look. What I'm saying on these podcasts, what Charles and I are discussing, what I've discussed in my live streams, you have to look at yourself in the mirror, because the only thing you have to blame is blame your leaders, and in a way blame yourself, especially by not accepting the facts that we're laying out to you. And I'm not the only one that's pointed this out. Many other people a lot smarter than me have pointed this out. And yeah, that's all I have to say. You have the power to change the argument, to put pressure against the donors. And I think one of the ways I think that I would give advice to you, to people who are patriotic Democrats, patriotic union leaders, people on our side, I think you have to tear the mask off and show how many of these so-called conservative politicians and big corporations are hypocrites. Which means that, hey, you're a woke corporation, but ooh, you're doing business in Saudi Arabia, which treats women like crap. Oh, you're against socialism, so you're against even legitimate regulations and tax increases in unions and for tariffs on dumped communist Chinese goods. You're against socialism and statism, but yeah, oh, you're doing business with Russia, where the state commands a large part of its economy, or China, which is still technically Marxist-Leninist. So how are you against socialism? You're just against socialism when it impinges on your bottom line. Or when somebody calls Bernie Sanders a communist, well, ooh, let's see. Let's take a look at your record, Mr. Senate candidate, Republican. Oh, did you do business in communist China? Like Ron Johnson said, that, oh, the climate for doing business in communist China is better than that the United States, which he actually said in a conversation with casino magnate Stephen Wynn. Yeah, this is the strategy, because that, in my humble opinion, unions need to do. And yeah, maybe it's fighting a little dirty, maybe it's a little McCarthyite or whatever, but so be it. Because I got to tell you, Brother Charles, and ladies and gentlemen in the audience, that's how I turned against Reaganism. When I saw these facts, and I was turned off by the hypocrisy of the extreme left. They said, oh, we're for peace and we're for social justice, the extreme left. And yet we're defending Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the Soviet Union, Putin's Russia, all the rest of it. And I'm like, what the fuck with this hypocrisy? I'm like, I don't want to align myself with this crap. And it's the same with the right, with much of the right. And that is why I'm politically homeless. That's why I can agree with parts of the right and parts of the left, but I can't affiliate myself with either. And that's all I have to say. But that's what you have to do. You got to point out the hypocrisies. If they claim you guys are a bunch of socialist communists, well, your hero Rand Paul is calling for trade with communist countries, even though he knows in print that their human rights violations, he says, is, quote, less than stellar. In a country like China or Cuba. This stuff has to be thrown in their face. And I know it's not nice, but unfortunately we have to fight. I don't want to say dirty, but we have to put opposition research on steroids and really show who these people are. I wrote a whole freaking book on this called Sowing the Seeds of Our Destruction, Useful Idiots on the Right. It got me sick writing it. And that's all I have to say. And I hope you take it back to your colleagues. I hope you promote this show, even circulate it privately, because I'm serious. I am scared shitless that my daughter is going to inherit a country that is going to be a total oligarchy, as portrayed in the series Incorporated, which was on Sci-Fi. I encourage people to look it up and read about it. I am very concerned about that we are going back to a new form of a plantation. I call it the new sharecropper economy. I'm very concerned about that. I am very concerned that you're going to have a country of slums coexisting with walled off communities, high walled off communities. where the very rich will live. And then the rest of we're going to be fighting over measly jobs to serve the super wealthy oligarchs. That is my concern. That's where I am concerned that my daughter, and if she has children, what they're going to face. I'm deeply concerned about this, Charles. I'm not kidding.
And I believe you, and I share this. I got 3 kids. I share the same concern, and I've been very fortunate in my life. And I've also worked hard, but I've been very fortunate in my life to have the things that I have. But even with that, Nevin, and I'm sure when it comes to, where you stand on stuff, who knows what percentage either of us is at, but this is what I know. I'm closer to being homeless on the streets than I am to being rich. And I just tell folks, like, stick together. Like, just stick together.
I agree. I mean, we stuck together during national crises. You had Franklin Roosevelt taking us the path of radicalism. Why? Because he preached a message that combined individualism and communitarianism without avoiding the extremes of fascism or communism, which the country was lurching towards during the Great Depression. You have this sense of World War II. Once the Japanese Axis forces bombed Pearl Harbor, we unified as a country, mostly. 9/11, I remember, I'm 48 years old, or I like to say 48 years young. And I remember 9/11 and the country unified, with a few exceptions here and there of certain academics, personalities, the odd ultra-left politician like former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney and others. But we unified. And we need to, as I mentioned on Labor Vision in our recent interview, we need to drop the culture war both sides. Because the fact of the matter is, this woke crap and transgenders on either side, whether you're for or against or have no opinion, it's not going to lower your rent. It's not going to cause you to earn more money. It's not going to affect your standard of living. And I have a guest, and the individual in question likes to say, man can't live by. And there's truth to that. But you know what? You can't survive without bread and shelter either. And as long as you don't have bread and shelter and health, nothing else is going to matter. And I'm not saying the state should provide everything for you, but the state needs to ensure, sometimes in I don't want to say iron-handed, but it's getting to the point where the oligarchs are not listening and refuse to listen to reason and argument, where you need a state that's going to ensure conditions that allow the broad mass of people to have certain basic needs to live, like union rights, where you work for a living, you get paid well and decent benefits as long as the company is profitable. You gotta do it better. Inequality is always going to exist. I'm not a proponent of equalizing everything, but the rate of inequality that we have is a major social issue. It's a national security issue. I read the RAND reports, RAND Corporation statistics, and while we're bitching about transgender bathrooms and this and that and wokeism and this and that and everything else, I'm for treating everyone with respect as long as they're respectful. I'm going to throw that out there. I don't discriminate against people like that or anything. It's just my style. But we need to drop the culture wars that divide us. Because black, white, gay, atheist, Christian, Jewish, whatever, small business people, urban, poor, we all got the same problems and all the same desires. We all want to do better for ourselves and families. And I agree with you, Charles, that the way to overcome that and realize is we got to stick together, and we can't be divided, all according to issues that ultimately will not matter from the grander scheme of things. So I probably have alienated most of my conservative audience by now and pissed them off, and my subscriptions will go down from 754 to like 54. Um, so any closing comments? It's just, this is something I feel very passionate about. I'm very verbose. I mean, I kind of apologize for that, but there are days where I want to run for office, but other days where I realize that I won't survive in either party. So, um, but any concluding remarks?
Just always appreciate the discussion, enjoy it. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about something that I think is really important, and it's this leaning into becoming a sort of a corporatocracy as opposed to a representative democracy. And I think that doesn't get enough attention. So thanks for the platform.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I look forward to having you again. Thank you again for having me on Labor Vision. I love you. I love your co-host. I think you do a great job. And I'm happy to be a guest on the Labor Vision program as much as you want, as long as both our schedules allow.
Sounds good.
All righty. And thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it. Appreciate Charles with your words of wisdom and your great analysis as always, and your commitment to America and its workforce. And thank you all. Enjoy your weekend. I'm probably going to do some paddleboarding in a little bit, so got to get the exercise in. That's my true passion, to be honest, these days. And take care. God bless. God bless America. And let's pray for a better country. Take care, y'all. Bye.